As the inquest into the death of trade unionist Dr Neil Aggett continues in Johannesburg, there are more questions about whether enough is being done by the post-apartheid government to ensure justice for victims of apartheid's brutality. Aggett died in police custody in 1982 at the then John Vorster Square. And according to the then South African Security Police, the trade union activist and doctor committed suicide while in detention. Now, the Aggett family is now fighting to get that decision overturned. And families such as the Bikos, the Aggetts, the Calatas, the Simelanes, the Timols, those are just some of the families who were left to pick up the pieces for themselves when their loved ones were killed by the apartheid government. So joining us now from our Sea Point studios is Lukhanyo Calata, the son of Fort Calata of the Cradock 4, who were murdered by the apartheid police. And in studio with me, Yasmin Suka, who's a lawyer from the Foundation for Human Rights and was, of course, also part of the TRC process. Thanks to both of you for joining us this morning. Yasmin, I want to start with you. One sounds like a stuck record at this point, talking about the TRC, the 300 files that were handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority. And once again, let's take stock. What has happened apart from the cases and these inquests that have been reopened by the families themselves?
One feels like one is bringing the NPA and the state kicking and screaming into a process of accountability for the victims and their family members. In the period since 1998, when we handed these 300 cases over, we have only seen 2 inquests reopened. We've seen 2 indictments, one which is stuck in the Timor case, where the perpetrator has applied for a stay of prosecution. And in fact, the word that comes to mind is absolute betrayal by the government of the families. And one wonders what one has to do to see more action before more perpetrators die and more family members die. One was struck when Liz Floyd was giving her evidence in the Aggett inquest that if this had been done at a proper time, you would have had the main interrogators still alive. Similarly, with the case of Ahmed Timol, if the state had done his case earlier, you would have had the main interrogators alive. And so the families are coming to court to look for justice. But at the end of the day, it's a race against time. And I think the big question for us is, can we allow another 16 years to elapse before these families see justice?
But we have a new head of the NPA, Shamila Batoy. When she was first appointed, she came here for an interview, and I specifically put the question of the TRC files that were handed over. And she did give an undertaking that it was something that she would look into. Have you had opportunity to speak to her about that?
Well, we've had several meetings with Shamila and some of the key members of her team. And in October last year, we held a special workshop with her team of prosecutors so we could speak about the way in which we could frame the indictments and what we would need to do together. Bear in mind that most of the investigations on these cases have been done by us hiring private investigators. And in fact, we fed most of that information to the NPA. But we also asked for certain commitments. And to be frank, 2 weeks ago, I had to write another letter to her, putting her and her team on notice that if they did not respond to their own commitments, then of course we would have to look into what action we were going to take. So the commitment is there politically, but that's not being translated into any kind of real action. And I think that's a problem for the families.
Now, Lukhanyo, when Yasmin spoke about, an absolute betrayal, you actually nodded quite vigorously there. I mean, how do you feel as one of the families who went before the TRC? And people would remember that East London sitting of the TRC, that's where the Archbishop broke down after, hearing this testimony from not only your mother, but from one of the other widows. And then there was a Mr. Malchas, and the Archbishop broke down. We remember that so vividly from the TRC. And yet, nothing is being done. So how does it feel?
It's the worst form of betrayal, isn't it? when you consider that my father, when you consider that his comrades, when you consider all the other hundreds and thousands of South Africans who gave and sacrificed their lives for us, for this democracy, for us to be where we are today, only for the government of the day, which is led by the African National Congress, for it to turn its back on the very same people that shed their blood for this freedom. It's incredible, because I can't describe it to you without getting incredibly emotional and incredibly angry at the level of betrayal at what we have seen over the last 25, 26 years of our democracy. We didn't get here because people were sat around a table and negotiated. We got this freedom because there were brave souls, there were brave young men and women, some of them who were fathers, some of them who were mothers, some of them are people's brothers and sisters, some of them were sons and daughters. And those people sacrificed their lives. They gave the best of who they are for us to enjoy this democracy today. And it's very, very sad that the organization for which they died for, or at least they died in its name, has now turned its back on those actual people such as Nokuthula Simelane, people such as Stanzabo Papes, people such as Fort Calata, Matthew Goniwe, Victoria Mxenge. The ANC has completely forgotten about those people and making sure that the lives of those people, at least that there's justice for the lives of those people. It's an incredible betrayal, Sakina.
And Lukhanyo, you write in your book, My Father Died for This, about the two attempts that had been made at reopening, your father's inquest. So where is your process right now?
Okay, so in 1994, there was a judgment on the second inquest into the murders of the Cradock Four. The first inquest, which ended in 1989, found that there was no one to blame for their murders. Then on the 28th of May, 1994, that was 18 days, just 18 days after the ANC President Nelson Mandela was sworn in as President of the Republic, a judge, Neville Zitzman, delivered a judgment in the second inquest. And then he said that the apartheid security forces were responsible for the murders of the Cradock Four. What he couldn't pinpoint were the individuals that were actually there on the night. So 18 days into our democracy, the ANC government was literally handed the opportunity to prosecute people responsible for the murders of the Cradock Four. Now, today, a Brigadier Joffel van der Westhuizen he's alive, he lives in Pretoria. He is the person that dictated the military signal for the permanent removal of Fort Calata, Matthew Goniwe, and Mbulelo Goniwe. He's alive, he sits in Pretoria. Are you telling me that in the last 26 years, the ANC government could not have prosecuted him as a conspirator to murder? What Joffel van der Westhuizen did is no different to what Dina Rodriguez did in the Baby Lee Jordan case. The similarities are that one person paid someone else to go and kill someone else. Dina Rodriguez is in jail today because she was found guilty as a conspirator to the murder of Baby Lee Jordan. Yet Brigadier van der Westhuizen is sitting there enjoying his life, never having been charged for his role in the murders of the Cradock Four. F.W. de Klerk sat in on meetings of the State Security Council where they were discussing what to do about the fate of these two teachers from Cradock in the Eastern Cape who had successfully led a revolution in this country. He sat in on those meetings. There was a meeting on the 12th of June in 1985 that took place here in Parliament, right? Now, de Klerk needs to come out and he needs to tell this country what his contribution was in that meeting of the State Security Council. Because a couple of days after that meeting, on the 27th of June, my father and Matthew Goniwe and two comrades of theirs, Sparum Konto and Strelo Mhlawuli, drove to Port Elizabeth. They never came back. right? So here are people that are still alive that need to be prosecuted for the murders of the Cradock Four. But I think the ANC's strategy is that it's waiting for all of these people to die so that it can then say, well, we tried to do something about it. Exactly as is the case now in the Aggett inquest, where nobody can be held responsible for the death of Neil Aggett because Stephen Whitehead died, I think, in the very same week that the reopening of this inquest was announced.
And this is the stark reality that we are faced with, Yasmin. Just following on from what Lukhanyo is talking about, the Steve Biko inquest after his death, the 13-day routine inquest, Magistrate Prince then ruling nobody was responsible. And we sit and we still wonder, when are people going to be held accountable? So how does one answer to the families of those victims?
Well, I think obviously I think that the state has an obligation, both in terms of its own domestic law and under international law, to ensure that there are prosecutions and investigations done in these cases. And of course, as we know, the state has failed dismally. We've had to take them to court to actually get action on these cases. Now, we have had our own investigator looking through all of these cases. We prepared a priority list of cases, and the Cradock case is, of course, one of those priority cases, and we've handed that over to Shamila as well. We believe that with a little bit of work, you can actually do something quite concrete around that particular case. But as you point out, there are more than 100 people who died in detention. There are many, many other cases of activists where the state was responsible at the time for their deaths. And so what we need to hear from them is who's the lead prosecutor on a case, who's the investigating officer. And that's really the tenor of the letter that we've written to her. We've said you've got a priority crimes unit. It was meant at a national level to take responsibility for these cases. You've adopted a policy of decentralization where the cases have been sent down to the regions. So now tell us exactly, what are you doing? Who's involved? At what state is the investigation, so that we know what we can do and how we can plan to ensure that there will be justice. But if we carry on in this way, where we have one inquest in a 2-year period, this is not sustainable. It's also not sustainable for the families of victims that we are having to find the funds to help them to access justice. Imtiaz Kaji, the nephew of Ahmed Timol, recently submitted a PIA request to the Ministry of Justice to establish what exactly was the 3.5 million rand that was paid to the lawyers of João Rodrigues for. And he was told, this is a private matter. You can't have access to that information. This is our money, public funds. We are entitled to know why the state is paying such huge amounts for the defense of perpetrators, and yet for the victims, they have to stand on the sidelines and watch while nothing actually happens. So we are at a crunch moment, and I think once we complete the Aggett inquest, then it's going to be time for a serious sit down with the Minister of Justice, the head of the NPA, and we have to say, tell us how you are going to deal with these cases in real time and not allow another 16 years to pass if we're going to have accountability. And I think it's really important that we ask the question, is this just about individual victims? It's actually not. It's about us as a society. The fact that the very foundation of our society was built on this compromise which said, if you apply for amnesty, if you make a full disclosure, if you're able to prove that you committed this act in pursuit of the objectives of either the state or the liberation movements, then you will never have to go to prison and you won't have to pay any damages to the victims. I think we are at the point where we have to say to the families of victims, now we are not only dealing with individual perpetrators, but we actually have to ask ourselves the question, is the state itself not also complicit in the delay? And should they not be paying damages to the victims and their families for the delay that has taken place in these cases and their failure to do their jobs.
And that's the next thing I wanted to ask. So perhaps let me direct it at Lukhanyo, because one can't help but feel, you know, as an observer, that this almost seems like secondary victimization. One would understand, you know, during the apartheid days where an inquest was conducted and nobody was held responsible, responsible, but this is supposed to be the government of those victims who died. So how does that make you feel?
Well, think about it like this. Who is the state serving? Because it's clearly not serving the interest of the families of the people that died for this country. It's clearly not serving the interests of the poor and the marginalized in this country. I think it was in 2008, Thabo Mbeki was still president at the time. My mother was here with me in Cape Town, and I remember having to rush her to the airport because she and the rest of the Cradock for mothers, alongside Thembi Nkadimeng, had to go to court to go and apply for an urgent interdict against President Thabo Mbeki because he had wanted a backdoor policy, right, on amnesty for people who never went to the TRC to apply for amnesty, and just for people generally, or for apartheid murderers and killers. He wanted for a blanket amnesty for those people. My mother, alongside Mrs. Goniwa, Mrs. Mhlawuli, and Mrs. Mkhonto, and Thembi Nkadimeng, went to court to stop the president of the country from granting this backdoor amnesty to apartheid killers and murderers. Now, for me, I look at that and I think, but who is this government serving? Who is it serving? Because we haven't forgotten how we got here. We haven't forgotten, unlike the ANC, we know the price that was paid for this freedom, right? And we just want to know, who are they serving if they are not serving the very same people whose lives were lost in defense or in pursuit of this democracy? Because how can they spend 3.5 million rand paying for the legal costs of João Rodrigues and not spend a single cent helping the Ahmed Timol family? How do they justify that? How do those people sleep with themselves at night? It's incredible, and we can no longer continue to find ourselves in this position. I agree with Yasmin that we need to have a serious conversation with the people that handle the Justice Ministry, and we need to have a conversation with the African National Congress. Think about it like this, Sakina, before I hand back to you. What resolution has the ANC taken post 1994 at either of its elective or at its policy conferences that deals specifically with the resolution of TRC-related killings?
And that's a great question to put to the African National Congress. But that application for blanket amnesty, Yasmin, is that not perhaps the clearest indication of government's intent and their appetite to actually deal with these matters?
Well, I think if you look back from, right to 2003, in 2005, we were given prosecution guidelines which really attempted to do this backdoor amnesty. And we then had to go to court, and in 2008, the court gave down a judgment which said you cannot go through this route. Then, of course, we had the pardons process, and they tried to use the pardons process again to give people another form of amnesty. And in the papers that were filed by Thembi Nkadimeng in the Simelane matter, we have two affidavits, one from Vusi Pikoli and one from Anton Ackerman, his deputy. And in fact, they allege that in their attempts to prosecute TRC cases, this is one of the reasons for why he lost his job. He also alleges that there was a secret committee that was dealing with another attempt to do a blanket amnesty. And in fact, we also have the minutes of that committee. And so perhaps, as you say, that is the clearest indication that the state has never wanted to proceed on these matters. Remember, each time we've had to go to court to force action. And when you look at the judgment of the High Court, the full bench, in the Timor matter, the court was very clear that it was not going to countenance any more political interference in these cases, either by the state or the NPA. And of course, we've had no indication from either party that there have been any investigations into how the political interference happened and why. And that is one reason why Lukhanyo and a number of the families of victims have also filed an application before Judge Zondo, asking him to look into how the NPA was captured and how elements of the state were captured in dealing with this accountability question. We've yet to hear from him on when there will be a hearing on this matter. But I think the state needs to take us into its confidence. They need to tell us why. Why don't they want to deal with these cases? Why are they not prepared to put any money into it? And why are they not doing or carrying out what their international and domestic obligations are? Do they need us to go back to court again? I think we can't go on playing this ping-pong game. What we really need to see is a firm commitment, which is followed by action.
Well, I'm loath to, but I have to leave it there. So thank you to both Lukhanyo Calata, who is, of course, the son of Fort Calata of the Cradock 4, and Yasmin Suka, who is a lawyer for the Foundation for Human Rights. And this conversation by no means is exhausted, and I suspect we will pick it up again at a later stage. With that, let's hand it over to Leanne for your latest news.